Story 1: The Hitchhiker on Route 16. The snow was coming down so thick I could barely see 10 feet in front of my truck. The windshield wipers were fighting a losing battle, and the defroster was working overtime just to keep a small patch of glass clear. This stretch of Montana highway is desolate on the best of days. But in a November blizzard, it felt like I was the last person on Earth. My name's Vance. 15 years behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler teaches you a lot of things. How to stay awake when your body's screaming for sleep. Which truck stops have decent coffee. And most importantly, that Mother Nature doesn't give a damn about your delivery schedule. But sometimes experience isn't enough to keep you from making a mistake. I'd been on the road for almost 14 hours straight, pushing the limits of what was legal or smart. The shipment of industrial refrigeration parts was already a day late due to mechanical issues back in Spokane, and my dispatcher was breathing down my neck. Just 2 more hours to reach Billings, I kept telling myself. 2 more hours and I could collapse into a motel bed. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was just snow playing tricks on my tired eyes. A flicker of movement on the roadside, barely visible through the swirling white. But as my high beams swept across, there was no mistaking it. A woman, standing on the shoulder of Route 16, her arm outstretched in the Universal Hitchhiker sign. She wore only a thin jacket, dark hair whipping around her pale face. No car in sight, no lights from a nearby house, just miles of emptiness in every direction. I blew past her. In my side mirror, I watched her figure grow smaller, still standing motionless in the storm. My conscience immediately started gnawing at me. Nobody could survive long in these temperatures, especially dressed like that. But every trucker knows the rules of the road. Picking up strangers is dangerous. People target truckers, especially on isolated stretches. I'd heard too many stories over the years. Damn it, I muttered, and hit the brakes. The big rig slid slightly as I pulled onto the shoulder and put it in reverse. When my doors lined up with where she stood, I pushed open the passenger side. "Get in," I called over the howling wind. "You'll freeze to death out there." She climbed up without a word, bringing a blast of frigid air into the cabin. Under the dome light, I could see her better, mid-30s maybe, with striking features and unusually pale skin. Her lips had a bluish tint. "Jesus, you must be half frozen," I said, cranking the heat higher. "What the hell are you doing out here?" "Car broke down," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "No cell service. I've been walking for a while." "In this weather? Where's your car?" She pointed vaguely behind us. "Few miles back. Battery died." Something felt off, but I couldn't place it. Maybe it was the way she showed no signs of shivering despite being out in sub-zero temperatures. Or how her clothes weren't nearly as snow-covered as they should have been. "I'm Vance," I said, pulling back onto the road, wipers still fighting the relentless snow. "Linnea," she replied, staring straight ahead. "Where you headed, Linnea?" "Not far. There's a turnoff about 20 miles up. I can direct you." I nodded, focusing on keeping the truck straight as wind buffeted its sides. When I reached over to adjust the heater again, my hand brushed against hers. It was like touching ice. "You're freezing," I said, trying to mask my shock. "There's a thermos of coffee in that compartment if you want." She smiled but didn't reach for it. "I'm fine." We drove in silence for a while, the only sounds the rumble of the engine and the storm raging outside. I kept glancing at her from the corner of my eye. Something about her made the hairs on my neck stand up. The way she sat perfectly still. How she never seemed to blink quite enough. "You know this area well?" I asked, trying to ease the tension I felt building inside me. "All my life," she said, then added after a pause. "It's changed though." "How so?" "People don't stop to help each other like they used to." The implied gratitude should have made me feel better. But instead, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. About 15 miles up the road, she suddenly pointed to the right. "There. You need to turn there." Squinted through the snow. There was no proper turnoff, just what looked like a narrow service road, unmarked and unplowed. "You sure? Doesn't look like anything's down there." "It's a shortcut," she insisted. Saves about 30 minutes. The main road floods in weather like this. Every instinct told me to keep driving, but something in her eyes made me slow down and turn. The truck lurched as we left the relative safety of the highway for the uneven terrain of the service road. My headlights carved a tunnel through darkness and swirling snow, revealing dense pine forests on either side. How much farther? I asked after we'd been crawling along for about 10 minutes. Just ahead, she murmured, leaning forward. There's a clearing. The road dipped suddenly, and I felt the truck losing traction. Before I could react, we were stuck, tires spinning uselessly in deep snow. Damn it! I slammed my palm against the steering wheel. We're not going anywhere in this. When I turned to Linnea, her entire demeanor had changed. The calm, almost detached expression was gone, replaced by something intense and desperate. I need you to understand, she said, her voice different now, more urgent. I need someone to know what happened. What are you talking about? This road, she said, looking out the window. 3 years ago, my car slid off right up there. She pointed ahead to a sharp bend. It wasn't a bad crash. I could have walked out, but my phone was dead, and it was so cold. A sick feeling spread through my gut as I finally understood why she had seemed so strange, why her skin was so cold. I waited for someone to drive by, she continued, her voice growing distant. But no one came. Do you know how long it takes to freeze to death, Vance? Your body fights it at first. The pain is excruciating as your extremities die. Then comes a strange warmth, almost peaceful. Then nothing. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I just wanted someone to find me, she whispered, to know where I am. When I turned to look at her again, the passenger seat was empty. I spent the night in my truck, engine running for heat, convinced I was losing my mind from exhaustion. When dawn broke, the storm had passed. I tried digging out, but the snow was too deep. Around noon, a highway patrol officer spotted my truck and brought a tow. Lucky we found you, the officer said as we waited for the tow truck. Nobody comes down this road, especially in winter. My mouth was dry as I asked, has there ever been an accident here? A woman, maybe 3 years ago. The officer's expression changed. How'd you know about that? Young woman named Linnea Koskinen. Slid off during a blizzard similar to last night's. By the time they found her car, she died of exposure. When did they find her? I managed to ask. That's the thing, he said, looking down the road. Her car wasn't visible from the highway. They only found her weeks later when a maintenance crew came through. Been doing this job 15 years, and that was one of the worst. The idea of her out here alone all that time. I never told him about my passenger. Who would believe me? But before we left, I showed him a photo on my phone. A selfie I'd secretly taken when we first got stuck, angling it to capture both of us in the frame. I told him I was documenting the situation for insurance purposes. In the image, I'm clearly visible, looking tired and stressed. The passenger seat beside me is empty. I still drive Route 16 when dispatched that way. Still pass that unmarked turnoff. But I never stop for hitchhikers at night anymore, no matter how bad the weather. And sometimes, when the snow is falling thick, I swear I can see her in my high beams. A solitary figure with her arm outstretched, still waiting for someone to find her. Story 2 CB Radio Stalker. I first noticed the black pickup somewhere around Abilene. Nothing special about it. Just your standard F-150 with tinted windows and a few dents in the rear fender. The kind of truck you see 1,000 times a day on Texas highways. But 3 hours later, when I pulled into a Love's outside of Odessa, it was still behind me. My name's Ruben. Been an owner-operator since 2010, hauling everything from baby diapers to industrial chemicals across the American Southwest. The Dallas to Phoenix route is practically my second home. I know every pothole, every decent truck stop, every speed trap along those 1,065 miles. August 2021 was my third run that month. A brutal stretch during one of the worst heat waves in recent memory. The pickup didn't set off alarm bells right away. Plenty of people drive long distances on I-20 and I-10. But when I spotted it again outside of El Paso, A cold feeling settled in my gut despite the 100-degree heat. Same black F-150, same distance behind me, same tinted windows hiding the driver. I'd been in this business long enough to develop decent instincts. Something wasn't right. That night at the Flying J in Las Cruces, I kept an eye out for the truck but never saw it pull in. I figured maybe I was being paranoid. Grabbed a shower, wolfed down some mediocre chicken fried steak, and crashed in my sleeper for a solid 6 hours. The next morning, the pickup was parked 3 spaces down from my rig. I pretended not to notice, went through my pre-trip routine like normal, and pulled back onto I-10 West. The CB radio had been quiet most of the trip. Not like the old days when Channel 19 never shut up. These days, with cell phones and satellite radio, the airwaves were often silent for hours, which is why it caught my attention when the static suddenly broke around Lordsburg. "Morning, Reuben." My hand froze on the coffee cup I'd been raising to my lips. I hadn't introduced myself to anyone on this run. "Got your ears on, Reuben? I know you're listening." The voice was male, deep but with a strange electronic quality, like it was being run through some kind of voice changer. I hesitated, then picked up the mic. "Who's asking?" A low chuckle crackled through the speaker. "Just a fellow traveler. Enjoying the view from back here." I checked my mirrors. About a quarter-mile behind me was the black pickup. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Just making conversation. Long drive ahead. Phoenix, right? Then home to Lisa and the kids in Allen? How are Tommy and Sarah doing these days?" My blood turned to ice. I'd never mentioned my family to anyone on this route. Never discussed where I lived. The few personal photos in my cab weren't visible from outside. "Who the hell is this?" I demanded. "You should call Lisa more often." The voice continued as if I hadn't spoken. "She gets lonely, especially when you're making those extra stops that don't show up on your logbook." I almost swerved off the road. Was this someone from my company? A DOT inspector who'd caught me fudging my hours? "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. "Sure you do. Like that stop outside Amarillo in 2016? The one you never reported." The mic nearly slipped from my sweating hand. Nobody knew about Amarillo. Nobody. It had been a dark night, much like any other on the road. I was running behind, trying to make up time after a delay in Oklahoma City. Pushing too hard, staying awake on caffeine and determination. I remembered the thump, thinking I'd hit a deer or stray dog. I remembered stopping, walking back with my flashlight, finding not an animal but a man. A homeless guy who'd been crossing the highway where no pedestrian had any business being. He wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. I panicked, looked around at the empty highway, got back in my truck and drove away. Never reported it. Never told a soul. The next morning, there was nothing on the local news. No reports of a body found. I eventually convinced myself that maybe he hadn't died, or that someone else had come along and helped him. But I knew better. The voice on the CB continued. "You drove away and left him there, just like those goods you occasionally help fall off the truck for your buddy in Tucson." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear over the blood rushing in my ears. I grabbed the mic again. "Who are other drivers hearing this? Is anyone else on this channel?" After a moment, another voice came through, a woman with a Midwest accent. "You okay there, driver? You're talking to yourself. You don't hear another person on this channel?" Male voice. "Talking about me?" "Negative, good buddy. Just you asking strange questions. You all right? Maybe pull over and get some rest." I switched channels, tried again with the same result. Nobody else could hear him. But when I went back to 19, he was still there. "It's just you and me, Reuben. Our little secret. Like Amarillo." For the next 2 hours, the voice continued, sometimes going quiet for 20 minutes, then returning with increasingly personal details about my life. My bank balance. Medical conditions I'd never told my company about. The password to my email account. I tried turning off the CB entirely, but when I turned it back on an hour later, he picked up mid-sentence as if he'd been talking the whole time. The black pickup never passed me, never fell more than a mile behind. By the time I reached Tucson, I was a wreck. Shaking, paranoid, convinced I was losing my mind. I decided I'd had enough. There was a rest stop coming up, and not a busy one with restaurants and fuel islands, but one of those bare-bones facilities with just bathrooms and picnic tables. I signaled, pulled off, and parked at the far end where no other vehicles were stopped. The black pickup followed, parking about 50 yards away. I grabbed the tire iron from behind my seat, shoved it into my belt at the small of my back, and stepped out into the blistering afternoon heat. I was done being stalked, done being terrorized. As I marched toward the truck, I heard the CB inside my cab squawk to life again. "Bad idea, Ruben." I ignored it and kept walking. The pickup's windows were so darkly tinted I couldn't see inside until I was right up on it. I rapped on the driver's side window with my knuckles. No response. I tried the door handle. To my surprise, it was unlocked. The door swung open. The truck was empty. Not just unoccupied, completely empty. No personal items. No signs anyone had been driving it. The key wasn't even in the ignition. I backed away, a wave of confusion and fear washing over me. I jogged back to my truck, suddenly desperate to get away from this place. The door to my cab was unlocked. I always lock my truck. Always. I drew the tire iron and cautiously climbed up to look inside. Everything appeared normal at first glance. Then I saw it on my seat, a Polaroid photograph, face down. With trembling fingers, I picked it up and turned it over. It was me, asleep in my sleeper berth. From the clothes I was wearing, it had been taken 2 nights earlier at the truck stop in Abilene. The angle suggested someone standing over me as I slept. On the back, written in red marker, "Next time I won't just watch." I don't remember the drive to Phoenix. I delivered my load on autopilot, turned down my next assignment, and deadhead straight back to Dallas. The black pickup never appeared again on that return journey, but I kept seeing it in my rearview mirror anyway. I installed dashcams pointing in all directions, put in GPS trackers, changed my routes completely, started carrying protection, switched CB channels randomly, eventually removing the radio entirely. For months, I jumped at shadows and eyed every black pickup with suspicion. 6 months later, I was in a motel in Albuquerque when a news segment caught my attention. Police had arrested a former long-haul trucker named Dominic Voss in connection with the murders of 3 drivers across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. They'd found detailed journals in his home describing his mission of cleansing the highways of drivers he deemed unworthy. The news showed his vehicle being towed into evidence, a black Ford F-150. They said he had sophisticated electronic equipment, including devices to hack into CB radio frequencies and tools for remotely unlocking modern vehicles. That he would stalk his victims for days, learning everything about them before making contact. I never found out how he knew about Amarillo. Never discovered why he let me go when others weren't so lucky. I still drive, but never alone. I've taken on a partner and we alternate shifts. I vary my routes, change trucks regularly, and never stay at the same stops twice in a row. And I never ever use a CB radio. Story 3: The Long Tunnel. There are certain rules we follow on the road. Don't drive tired. Check your blind spots. And for God's sake, don't take unmarked shortcuts, especially when you're hauling 30 tons of freight through unfamiliar mountain territory. I broke that last rule in October 2019. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't made it out. My name's Siobhan. Been driving big rigs for almost 7 years now. Not many women in this line of work. Only about 7% of long-haul truckers are female, which means I'm constantly having to prove myself. So when dispatch called saying they needed someone to make an emergency delivery to a manufacturing plant in upstate New York, I volunteered. The regular driver had called in sick, and the deadline was tight. I'd never driven that particular route before, but I figured it couldn't be that different from my usual runs. I was dead wrong. It was late afternoon when I hit the foothills of the Adirondacks. The GPS had been recalculating repeatedly due to an accident on the main highway, and finally suggested a detour through what it claimed was a service road that cut through the mountains. In 3.2 miles, turn right onto Mountain Pass Road, the robotic voice instructed. The road wasn't on my trucker's atlas, but the GPS was insistent. I was already running behind, and the thought of missing my deadline made my stomach clench. The company had recently been laying people off, and I couldn't afford to give them any reason to add me to that list. When I reached the turnoff, I hesitated. It was barely 2 lanes wide, with faded yellow lines and crumbling asphalt. A small, weathered sign read Mountain Pass Road, tunnel ahead, clearance 14 feet 2 inches. My rig would fit, but just barely. Something about the road gave me the creeps. Probably just the way the dense forest crowded in from both sides, blocking out most of the late afternoon sun. But my GPS showed it would save me nearly 2 hours compared to the detour around the mountain. Screw it, I muttered, and turned onto the narrow road. For about 15 minutes, the drive was uneventful, just a winding path through increasingly dense forest. Then I rounded a bend and saw the tunnel entrance looming ahead. It was an old-style construction, with rough-hewn stone around the opening that looked like it dated back to the 1930s or earlier. No lights visible inside. I slowed as I approached. There should have been reflectors, warning signs, something. Instead, there was just a gaping hole in the mountainside. A chill ran down my spine, and for a moment I considered turning around. But there was no good place to maneuver a semi on this narrow road. Forward was the only option. I flipped on my high beams and CB radio, hoping to hear if any other truckers were in the area. Nothing but static came through the speaker. The moment I entered the tunnel, my radio died completely. Not static, just dead air. The temperature in the cab seemed to drop 10 degrees despite the heater running. My headlights pierced maybe 30 feet into the darkness ahead, revealing curved walls slick with moisture and a road surface that had seen better days. Just an old tunnel, I said aloud, my voice sounding flat and strange in the confined space. Nothing to worry about. But as I drove deeper, I noticed my GPS had frozen, still showing my position at the tunnel entrance. The little miles to destination counter wasn't moving either. Great. I kept a steady pace, waiting for the light at the end to appear. According to my research later, the tunnel was supposed to be less than half a mile long. A straight shot through the mountain that should have taken about a minute to traverse. After 5 minutes of driving, I still couldn't see the exit. I checked my watch, then checked it again 3 minutes later. The tunnel should have ended by now. I tapped my GPS, hoping it would update, but the screen remained frozen. That's when I noticed the markings on the walls. At first, I thought they were some kind of maintenance notation, maybe marks for where repairs were needed. But as my headlights swept across them, I realized they were handprints. Hundreds of them, pressed into the concrete walls at about the height someone would reach if they were walking alongside my truck. Some looked fresh, the moisture making them glisten in my headlights. I pressed harder on the accelerator, the needle climbing to 45-50 miles per hour, too fast for a tunnel this narrow. But I didn't care. I just wanted out. The engine began to sputter. No, 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 I muttered, pressing the gas pedal to the floor. The truck lurched, regained power momentarily, then started to slow despite my efforts. The RPMs dropped steadily, the engine coughing like it was being starved of oxygen. I'd been in the tunnel for nearly an hour according to my watch when the engine died completely. The sudden silence was deafening. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. My headlights remained on, running off the battery, but I knew they wouldn't last long. I reached for my flashlight in the glove compartment, my hands shaking so badly I dropped it on the floor. When I retrieved it and clicked it on, the beam was pathetically weak compared to my headlights, barely illuminating a few feet in front of me. The CB radio was still dead, and now my cell phone showed no service. I was completely cut off. That's when I heard it. A faint scraping sound coming from somewhere deeper in the tunnel, ahead of where my headlights could reach, like something being dragged across the rough concrete floor. I froze, listening intently. Stopped, then started again, closer this time. Swinging my flashlight toward the sound revealed nothing but more tunnel. But as I moved the beam across the walls, I noticed something I'd missed before. Among the handprints were words, or rather, the same words repeated over and over, carved into the concrete. Turn back. The scraping sound grew louder, more deliberate. Now it seemed to be coming from multiple directions, echoing off the tunnel walls until I couldn't tell where it originated. A sudden wave of cold air hit me, so frigid it burned my lungs when I gasped. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then stabilized at an even lower brightness. Something brushed against my arm. I screamed, jerking away from the passenger window. There was nothing visible there, but I could have sworn I felt fingers trailing across my skin through my jacket. Then came the whisper, so close to my ear it could have been inside my own head. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was dry, like paper rustling, neither distinctly male nor female, and it wasn't alone. Other whispers joined it, an overlapping chorus of warnings and threats that surrounded the cab. "Get out. Turn around. No way through. You'll join us." My entire body was rigid with terror. The scraping sounds were directly beside my truck now, and my failing flashlight revealed scratch marks appearing on the walls in real time, as if invisible claws were dragging across the concrete. With trembling hands, I tried the ignition again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. My headlights were noticeably dimmer now, the darkness encroaching from all sides. The temperature had dropped so low I could see my breath. The whispers grew more insistent, and the scratching surrounded my truck, on the roof, along the trailer, against the doors. Desperate, I tried the ignition one last time, silently pleading with whatever higher power might be listening. The engine roared to life with a sound so loud it seemed to shake the entire tunnel. Not thinking twice, I floored it, tires spinning before catching traction on the damp surface. The headlights cut through the darkness ahead, stronger than before, and I could swear they illuminated shadowy figures scattering from the road, pressing themselves against the walls. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look too closely at what was retreating from my path. After what felt like hours of driving but couldn't have been more than minutes, I burst out of the tunnel into the dim light of early evening, the truck bouncing violently as it hit the rougher pavement outside. I didn't stop, didn't slow down until I'd put at least 5 miles between me and that mountain. When I finally pulled over at a rest area to collect myself, I checked the timestamp on my GPS, which had started working the moment I exited the tunnel. According to the device, only 7 minutes had passed from when I entered the tunnel until I emerged. My watch, which had been reliable for years, showed I'd been in there for over an hour. Later, I researched that tunnel obsessively, discovered it was built in 1973, and during construction there had been a cave-in. 8 workers were trapped inside. Rescue efforts went on for days before they were declared dead. Their bodies were never recovered because attempting to retrieve them would have risked additional collapses. The tunnel was officially closed 6 months after my experience, following what local news described as multiple unexplained accidents. Company records, which I shouldn't have had access to but found ways to see, showed 3 other drivers had quit after taking that route. None of them had filed reports explaining why. I still drive trucks, still make my deliveries on time, but I double-check every unfamiliar route against physical maps, and I never, ever take shortcuts through mountains. And to this day, I keep a voice recorder running whenever I drive through any tunnel. Because sometimes, when I play back the recordings, beneath the rumble of my engine and my own breathing, I can make out whispers.